Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin, Chapter 8. Rielle started second-guessing herself the minute Moffat got a hold of her and directed her behind a dressing screen. The wardrobe people had made quick work of her, putting her in an outfit similar to the one that Tracy had worn. Moffat flitted about, adding makeup here and there. When the wardrobe people were finished with her clothes and Moffat had put her brushes and mascara away, she gave the blonde a wary look. "What?" Rielle asked. "Do I look like a complete idiot?" "No, it's just—" "What?" Rielle snapped, her nerves getting the best of her. "Your hair." "What about it?" Rielle asked. "Gregorio wanted me to take out the braids and let it be loose with waves." "Oh," Rielle answered. She had worn the braids ever since she had joined the military. They represented respect for her sisters in arms and honored her mother's memory. It would be weird not having them, but she could always put them back after the shoot. "Do what you need to do," Rielle said. Moffat grinned and patted a seat at the makeup area. 20 minutes later, after Moffat worked her magic and the wardrobe people came back with heels and jewelry for Rielle, the blonde took a nervous step over to the set, and the room fell silent once again. "Goddess," Byron whispered from a corner of the room. Beside him, Garrett admitted, "This is going to be fucking fantastic. Her fans will lose their minds." On the set, Scylla looked at her bodyguard and reminded herself to breathe. Gregorio prepared his camera, and the set people adjusted the gray club chair on the set. "We'll start with this," the photographer said. He had them sit in various positions, camera constantly flashing as they tried this pose and that pose. Finally, he settled on having Rielle perch on the arm of the chair, one heeled foot resting on the seat, the other on the floor just behind Scylla's foot. He instructed the brunette to move in close. "Scylla, put your hand on Rielle's shoulder." The brunette stepped closer, following the photographer's instructions. "Lower, please." Rielle could feel the heat of Scylla's hand move on her back, and she swallowed, glancing over at the brunette. Gregorio looked around his camera. "Rielle, face toward me for now." Scylla resisted a laugh as Rielle rolled her eyes before moving her head back into position. "And flex your arms, please. I want to see that definition." Rielle awkwardly tried to follow the photographer's instructions. "Okay, Scylla, I need you to step closer." Gregorio looked again and nodded. "Now shift your right leg, please." As the brunette complied, Rielle could see that the slit in her dress revealed her bare leg, and Rielle thought that she might just pass out. Everything in her wanted to reach out and run her hand up the brunette's thigh. "Rielle," Gregorio began. The blonde tensed, sure that the photographer was going to fuss at her again and tell her to keep her eyes forward. But as he gave her the next set of instructions, her eyes grew large. It was almost as if he'd read her mind. "If you're comfortable with it, I want you to move your hand out and rest it on Scylla's leg." "Gregorio," Scylla began, but stopped talking as soon as she felt the blonde's hand just above the inner part of her bare knee. Her eyes closed and she resisted moaning right then and there on the set. The photographer waited for the musician to open her eyes, and he grinned at the expression on her face as the camera clicked over and over. "A bit higher, Rielle." Scylla clenched her jaw. That was exactly what she both desperately wanted, and at the same time did not want at all. The blonde, ever the dutiful soldier, complied, and Scylla could feel her limbs start to tremble as the blonde slid her hand up her inner thigh and into position. The camera clicked a few more times and Scylla cleared her throat. "Let's take a break," she called out, voice tight. Gregorio frowned but lowered his camera. "I'll give you 5 while they remove the chair." Rael and Scylla moved just out from under the lights, and the assistants stepped up on the set to remove the chair, while Gregorio studied his shots that were automatically transferred to the nearby laptop that sat on a standing desk. Moffat. Scylla shiny. Glory rushed forward with powder and refreshed Scylla's makeup. "And get rid of Rael's hand jewelry. Just a simple ring, please." Rael handed the jewelry over to Glory and retrieved the ring she always wore on her index finger. "All right, ladies. On set, please." Scylla and Rael stepped back into position under the lights. Gregorio instructed them to stand in a stage pose, with one foot in the direction of a would-be audience and the other towards each other as if they were having a conversation. "Closer, please, closer." Eventually, the two women were so close that they were touching. "Scylla, I want you to lift your right leg and hook it around Rael's hip." The brunette had a flashback of some move out of Dirty Dancing and turned her eyes on Gregorio, prepared to tell him things were going too far, when Rael reached out a hand to help Scylla support the pose and shot her a pointed look. As Scylla slid into position, she could hear the blonde's breath hitch, and she smirked at her bodyguard in spite of herself. The camera clicked over and over. Rael shifted slightly, pulling Scylla tighter against her center and sliding the hand she had supporting her to her bottom, squeezing gently. Scylla bit back a moan, and Rael flashed her a cocky grin. The camera clicked for several more seconds, and then Gregorio took a step back. "Okay, I think we have what we need with that set. We can move on to something else after you take 20. Scylla didn't move for several seconds, not trusting herself to be able to stand on her own. "You okay?" Rael asked as she shifted her grip on the brunette and helped her to regain footing. She gazed into the musician's cerulean eyes, her own pale blue orbs filled with concern. "Yeah," Scylla answered, trying to smile. "These heels are just killing me," she added, and quickly moved toward one of the chairs in the makeup area. She didn't care that the excuse was hot garbage. If she didn't step away from the blonde, she was going to come undone right then and there. Rael moved over to one of the chairs just off the set and took a seat, shaking slightly. That had been intense. Byron approached her with a bottle of water and a smile as he sat down beside her. "Thanks," Rael said, and took a long drink. "It's hot as hell up here." "It certainly is," Byron said. Rael blushed, ducking her head, embarrassed at what she'd just said to Scylla's brother. "I mean, with all the lights." "I know, Rael," Byron said. "You're amazing. Thank you for what you're doing for my sister." "This is nothing," Rael said, thinking about her actual job. Her duty to keep the brunette safe, even if it meant she might have to take a bullet for her someday. Byron looked at the blonde for a moment and then stood up, shaking his head. "You have no clue, do you?" Rael was about to ask the lanky man what he meant, when Gregorio called out. "Okay, people, I want to do something different," Rael groaned. "Back to the torture." Scylla understood what Rael had meant by torture. Photoshoots were physically taxing, and this shoot had been deliciously torturous to her. Scylla and Rael listened to what Gregorio had in mind, both rolling their eyes at the idea of going through another wardrobe change. "We did fancy," Gregorio explained. "Now we need something more natural, more everyday." A dozen or so tried on and then rejected outfits later, Gregorio finally approved a simple black turtleneck and dark jeans for Scylla. They looked through the wardrobe room for something to put on Rael, but Gregorio eventually decided that what the blonde had worn when she had arrived at the studio that morning would do nicely. Sans her weapon, of course. He talked to Moffat, and she adjusted their hair and makeup. Rael's was simply refreshed, while Gregorio instructed Scylla's hair to be let loose from the updo she had had in the morning. On the set again, he had them move this way and that and tried various poses with different chairs and sitting positions. Eventually, the photographer had everything removed from the set. "Scylla, Rael," Gregorio exclaimed, "you ladies have astounded me." On set, Both women smiled, and Gregorio continued to snap more images as they moved. "All right, ladies, just one more pose. Riel, please step behind Scylla and pull her into your arms." The bodyguard did as instructed and supported the brunette as Scylla relaxed in her arms. The camera clicked a few times, and then Gregorio turned his back on them as he went to look at the images that had been transferred to his laptop. Riel kept her toned arms tight around the musician and bent her head forward, whispering into Scylla's ears. "Tired?" "Yeah, a bit," Scylla answered, voice low. "Just rest then," Riel murmured, her lips brushing against the musician's ear. Scylla shuddered in her bodyguard's arms, and Riel held the brunette tighter. "Relax, I've got you." Scylla dropped her head back on her bodyguard's shoulder and sighed contentedly, feeling more comfortable and safer than she could ever remember feeling in her entire life. They didn't notice that Libba Swite took one of her husband's extra cameras and clicked off a few more shots of the pair. Gregorio released them a few moments later with promises to have some of the proofs ready for their final approval in a few days, and the two reluctantly stepped off the set and back to the dressing area where Moffat helped them get rid of their makeup and get back to normal. In the limousine on the ride back to the mansion, Byron and Moffat chatted quietly with Isadora about what had happened during the photo shoot, while both Riel and Scylla sat side by side, fast asleep. As Helen drove the limo, Garrett played with his phone in the seat beside her, and the light distracted her. She couldn't imagine who he would still be texting at this late of an hour. When she stopped the car at a traffic light, she looked over at the screen and was surprised to see him scrolling through several photos of Scylla in poses with Riel. Some were pretty racy. She was even more shocked when it looked like he attached them to an email. The noise of a send message sounded from his phone, and it was all the confirmation that she needed. He had sent the photos to someone. He sat at his kitchen counter. With medical gloves on his hands, he carefully opened the magazine and began to cut out the words that he would need. Using tweezers to hold the cutouts and a brush for the paste, he began to assemble the words of the next love letter to his siren. He had tried to get her attention for so long. He had left her presents, but she had not responded. He would have to do more to get her attention. His next gift would be more impressive. He'd been lucky at Beltane. He had got so close that he could practically reach out and touch the object of all his desire and later of all his hate. Her security had not succeeded in finding him out, and he came away from the club with a new prop to use for his next present. He picked up one of Scylla Ramshorn's shoes carefully and held it close to his face. He inhaled deeply, a hit of sandalwood and musk filling his nostrils. He would need to be more careful now than ever, though. There was a new one with her, the one who had a face like an angel. She'd scooped the sexy, naughty bitch up and carried her away before the crowd could take her. He didn't know who this angel was, but he had seen the pictures of the blonde in the newspaper. She would have to stay out of his way, or he would be forced to eliminate her. She would not keep him from making the naughty witch burn. The sounds of screams could be heard from the basement, interrupting his thoughts, and he grinned as he picked up the other shoe and made his way down the stairs. He would eventually return the shoes to their owner, but for now he needed them for another purpose, a sacrifice for the witch and her evil conjuring. The photo shoot with Gregorio had been the kickoff for the next round of grueling photo sessions and public appearances. The last 2 days of Scylla's schedule had been full, and Riel nearly cried with relief when Scylla out and out refused to go out earlier in the evening. She didn't know who it was that Garrett wanted the musician to do an interview with, but he had grudgingly accepted her compromise to do an internet interview on some YouTube channel instead. Adam something or another. It gave everyone a bit of rest and Riel the chance to work on her client's case. Riel sipped the whiskey from her glass, her iPad on her lap playing Scylla's music videos over and over again on loop. She tried to find some of her older music, but the early stuff was done long before the internet had exploded, as it had now, where everything was a simple click away. She'd asked Isadora for some of the musician's earlier work, and when the manager failed to deliver, she had resorted to asking Byron, but so far she was stuck with only the newer stuff. The more the brunette swayed on the screen, the more difficult Riel had focusing on the music itself. Instead, her mind kept flashing back to the other day at the photo shoot, and the way the musician had felt pressed up against her. She She took a shaky breath, and as she swiped her finger to begin the video again, she reminded herself that she wasn't doing this to fantasize about her client. Strewn out on the coffee table were pictures of the dolls and the notes that the musician had been sent. She had a legal pad and a pen with her, and she was trying to match up lyrics with the wording in the notes, looking for some sort of pattern. Some sense of when this psycho must have become obsessed with the brunette. Absently taking another sip, she realized that her glass was empty. She stood and made her way back into the kitchen to pour another drink, when a soft knock drew her to the door of the guest house instead. Rael's brow quirked when she opened the door to find Scylla standing there and holding an envelope. Instantly alert, she reached for the envelope. "When did you get this? Did you open it?" Scylla's eyes widened, and she immediately shook her head as the understanding of Rael's reaction dawned on her. "No, that's not what you think it is." "You didn't receive this?" Rael asked. "No," Scylla answered. "It's for you." "Huh?" Rael asked, confused. Scylla rolled her eyes at the blonde and gestured. "Think you could be kind enough to invite me out of the cold?" Rael took in the brunette's attire, simple jeans and a t-shirt with an unbuttoned light flannel jacket, and she immediately took a step back. "I'm sorry, come in." The brunette walked past Rael and sauntered into the living area. "Care for a drink?" the blonde asked automatically. Scylla turned and with a smirk asked, "Think you can find the wine this time?" Rael chuckled, walked to the island. She turned and held up the bottle of Glenmorangie. "Not drinking wine tonight." Scylla squinted at the bottle and asked, "The Quinta Ruben?" The blonde smiled and nodded. "Good choice," Scylla answered. "Sweet and spicy." "Just like you," Rael commented as she took another glass from the cabinet and poured them both a couple of fingers of the honey-orange-colored liquor. "Neat or on the rocks?" "Neat," Scylla answered. Rael stepped back over to join Scylla on the couch in the living area and caught her looking at the photocopies of the evidence on the coffee table. "Do you recognize any of it?" Rael asked, handing her a glass of the scotch. Scylla took a sip and then asked, "Why would I?" Rael shrugged. "We haven't really talked about this, but it's entirely possible that you know whoever is doing this to you." Scylla shook her head. "I don't know anyone who would do this kind of thing. Maybe it's somebody you used to know. An old lover, maybe?" Rael took a drink of the scotch, swallowing slowly as it burned the unasked question down her throat. Scylla's brows furrowed as she searched the blonde's eyes. Had there really been a question there, or was it just wishful thinking on her part? Falling back into old habits, she shot the blonde a cocky grin. "Well, I suppose it would take a while to go through that list." The bodyguard kept her facial expression neutral. It would probably be someone from around that time that Sexy Naughty Bitchy came out. If it was an old lover, it would have been someone that was hurt pretty badly, a nasty breakup. "No, I haven't really had any of those. Breakups have been fairly mutual. Both parties left satisfied," Scylla said, her answer deliberately vague. "Not every breakup is mutual. Someone almost always gets hurt," Rael pressed. Scylla sighed. "It was a long time ago, Rael." "It's important, Scylla." "Look, I said it was a long time ago, and it was a bad time for me, real bad. It was just after my parents died. Half the time I was drunk on booze or whatever someone slipped me after a show, and the other half I was drunk on the success of the song. Lots of people got hurt. And I can't give you names and never had in the first place." Scylla huffed and took a gulp of the whiskey, the burning in her throat matching the burning of embarrassment on her cheeks at the confession. Rael quirked a brow, but let the subject go and took another drink of her scotch. "Well, how about someone in the music industry? Someone who saw you as competition?" Scylla took another smaller sip of her drink and thought for a moment. After a while she shook her head. "Another long list, but I don't think so." Rael sighed, frustrated. "People don't randomly do this, Syl." Scylla smiled, despite the topic that they were discussing. It was too heavy a topic, and the brunette didn't have any answers to give the blonde anyway. Changing the subject, she picked up the envelope she'd brought with her and handed it to Rael. "Byron said you wanted copies of my older music. Why?" Rael nodded towards the evidence on the table and to the legal pad. "These notes contain some lyrics in your songs, predominantly from Sexy Naughty Bitchy and burning witches, but there could be some from your older songs too. And why does that matter? Scylla asked. It could help establish a timeline that might give us a clue to who is doing this. Well, that's everything, Scylla said, gesturing to the envelope that the blonde had put on the table with the evidence. Everything that's been released since I started recording music when I was a kid. And unreleased? Raelle asked, excited at the new possible avenue of inquiry. She hadn't even considered the possibility that there could be unrecorded music. If they found lyrics in the notes that matched unreleased music, it seriously lessened their suspect pool. That's private, Scylla said, the finality of the subject evident in her tone. Raelle's brows furrowed. But if it would help... It won't, Scylla answered. No one has access to my journals. Byron does, Raelle said. Scylla felt a spark of anger flare inside of her and glared at the blonde. Surely you are not suggesting that my brother is doing this. No, but I can't rule out... No, Raelle, Scylla said, her voice a warning. No one here would do this to me. The bodyguard put her arms out in a gesture of surrender. All right, Scylla, okay. The brunette closed her eyes and took a deep breath, calming herself. When she opened her eyes again, she could see the concern on Raelle's face. I'm sorry, Ray. I know that you're just trying to do your job. Raelle nodded. She really didn't want to argue with the musician. Not when she'd much rather do other things. Ever since the photo shoot, she'd found herself thinking about how much she wanted to touch the musician again. Hold her in her arms. She glanced down at Scylla's glass and seeing it empty, she husked. Refill? Scylla looked into Raelle's pale blue eyes and recognized the look she saw there. It was obvious her bodyguard had been drinking for a while, frustration probably fueling her thirst. The brunette was very tempted to say yes. Remembering the photo shoot the other day, she knew it would be easy. Raelle may not be ready to be with her out of some ridiculous sense of professionalism, but the musician knew that she wanted her. The problem was that Scylla wanted Raelle too. She thought back to those encounters she'd had in those early years and the flings she'd had since. Meaningless physical acts of temporarily forget the pain and later to meet a physical need. She was beginning to realize that she didn't want that with Raelle. She wanted more. For the first time in her life, she shook her head and stood, ready to walk away from something she desperately desired. No, I should go to bed. Early day tomorrow. Raelle shrugged, but the expression on her face showed her disappointment. I'll walk you out. I can find my own way, Scylla said. It is my property after all, she added, teasing. My papa would never let me live it down if I let a girl walk herself home. The blonde stood, albeit a bit unsteady, and gallantly offered Scylla her arm. Scylla laughed and linked their arms, the previous awkwardness between them forgotten, and together they walked out of the guest house and back towards the main house of the mansion. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.